Hello everyone, welcome back. In the last chapter, Diep escaped and began walking 150 kilometers, alone, exhausted, and determined to return to the man who still waited for her, James. But what if the past doesn't let you go? Tonight's story picks up when Diep is only 100 kilometers from home. She's tired, wounded, but not alone. Because somewhere in the shadows, John is watching. And somewhere on the road, James is still searching. Two paths, one chase, and a love strong enough to walk through fear. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to follow every chapter of this unforgettable journey. Now, let's begin. The afternoon sun hung low, its light fractured through the dusty leaves lining the narrow countryside road. Diep's shadow stretched long across the path as she limped toward a roadside tea shack, a crooked wooden structure barely standing, nestled beside a rice field, whispering in the breeze. Her lips were cracked, feet blistered, stomach hollow, but her eyes still held the quiet fire of someone who refused to fall. A hunched old woman sat inside, pouring tea with the rhythm of someone who had seen too many years to rush anything. "Excuse me," Diep said, voice rasped. "May I have a bit of water?" The old woman looked up, her gaze softening when she saw the dirt on Diep's legs, the torn fabric at her sleeve. "Of course, child. Sit. You look like the road has been chasing you." Diep offered a tired smile, accepting the cup with trembling hands. As the woman ladled rice into a small bowl, she added, almost absently, "There was a man here earlier, tall, sunken eyes. Asked if I saw a girl with a tired face, walking south." The world paused. Diep's breath caught in her throat. Her hand gripped the cup tighter. Did he say who he was? "No," the woman said, narrowing her eyes, but his voice had a bite to it, like someone looking for trouble. Diep stood, every bone in her body suddenly tense. "Thank you," she whispered. "I have to go." She didn't run, not yet, but her heartbeat had already begun. The bowl of rice sat untouched on the table. The wind picked up as Diep stepped back onto the road, her feet unsure but her instincts sharp. She didn't dare look back at the shack. The image of the man the old woman described etched itself into her mind. Sunken eyes, sharp voice, restless energy. It could only be him, John. She crossed the edge of the field and slipped into a dirt path that curved away from the road, shielded by tall sugarcane and wild grass. Her breathing was shallow, not from exhaustion, but from fear blooming in her chest like something alive. Every shadow twitched. Every bird call felt like warning. Somewhere, not far, James was on a different road. The map he carried was worn at the creases, marked with circles and scribbled notes. Each a rumor, a sighting, a whisper. At a dusty fuel stop just an hour earlier, a truck driver had mentioned a girl who looked like her. Quiet type, looked like she hadn't eaten in days, kept looking over her shoulder. James didn't wait for more. The moment he heard the description, he was already turning the ignition. "I'm close," he told himself. "Just let me get there in time." Back on the winding path, Diep ducked under low branches, her bag pressed to her side. Each crunch of her foot on gravel echoed louder than it should. Then, faint behind her, a car door slammed. She turned. No one in sight. But the feeling had returned. That old awful feeling of being watched, of being hunted. Voice trembling in her mind, she whispered, "Don't stop, just don't stop." A crow screamed overhead, and the sun began to bleed into the trees. The steering wheel vibrated beneath his fingers, and John gripped it tighter as the cracked road unfurled in front of him. Dust trailed behind his old truck like a ghost too tired to vanish. His eyes, sunken and rimmed with shadows, flicked between the road and the rearview mirror. He'd seen her, he was sure. Not clearly, just a figure in motion, slipping away near the shack. But he'd know that shape anywhere. The way she held her shoulders, the way she moved like she didn't trust the ground beneath her feet, it was her. "It's not over," he muttered. "Not until she learns what it means to leave me behind." The truck jerked slightly as he pulled off the road and parked behind a thicket of trees. He reached for the glove compartment and pulled out a flashlight. Its battery light blinked low, but it would do. From a distance, the golden horizon was already fading into charcoal. Elsewhere, less than 20 kilometers away, James pulled up to another roadside stand. His voice was hoarse from asking the same question over and over. Did anyone see a girl, mid-20s, tired-looking, traveling alone? The old man there blinked, then pointed. She was here maybe half an hour ago, took that road to the east. James didn't even thank him. He was already running back to his car. Back near the sugarcane path, Diep stopped. A sound behind her, metal on metal, a flashlight clicking on. She dropped to a crouch, heart hammering. In the dark, a beam of light swept across the trees like a hunting dog sniffing the air, and a voice slithered out. "Diep, I know you're here." Diep bolted. There was no time for thought, only instinct, the raw, trembling pulse of survival. The beam of the flashlight grazed the edge of her jacket as she lunged into the field of tall grass and wild reeds. The stalks slapped against her face, sliced at her arms, but she didn't stop. Behind her, branches cracked. Heavy footsteps thudded through the undergrowth. And then, his voice, low and too close, "You can't run forever, Diep." She didn't answer, didn't look back. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she kept going. The field opened up into a narrow embankment leading down to a dry canal bed. She jumped, landed hard on her side. Pain shot through her ribs, but she rolled, scrambling to her feet. Mud clung to her palms. Blood trickled from her knee, but she didn't feel it. Not yet. In the distance, car lights, a road, a chance. She pushed forward, half limping, half running, weaving between broken fences and rusted signs. The world blurred, just shapes, shadows, movement. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere, someone closed a door. Somewhere. James was driving toward her. At the edge of the canal, she collapsed behind an overturned cart. Breath ragged, eyes wide. She pressed her back to the metal, biting her lip to keep from crying out. She could hear him again, closer this time. The flashlight sweeping, the gravel crunching. And then, silence. Too quiet. She closed her eyes, whispering into the dark. Just one more night. Let me live one more night. The darkness pressed close, thick with the scent of damp earth and rust. Diep crouched behind the overturned cart, her breath shallow, each inhale a gamble against the sound. She pressed her hand over her mouth, trying to quiet the ragged rhythm of fear. Just above her, a beam of light swept slowly across the field, moving in wide arcs, hunting, deliberate. It passed over the broken fence, brushed the edge of a fallen branch, then hovered. Just a moment too long near her hiding place. Footsteps. Measured. Heavy. Then stillness. From behind the cart, Diep could hear his breathing. Not fast, not rushed, calm, confident, close enough that she could hear the soft scrape of gravel beneath his boot. "I know you're here, Diep." John's voice slithered out again, quieter this time. "It's always the same with you. Run, hide, pretend. But we both know you can't disappear." Her body trembled, but her eyes stayed open, focused, alert. "He doesn't know if I saw him," she thought. "If I stay quiet, if I don't move, maybe he'll think I kept going." A pause. The light drifted away, slowly, reluctantly. Then, silence. Diep didn't move, not yet. The wind picked up, rattling the reeds. An owl called distantly, breaking the stillness. She counted 10 breaths, 20, 30. Finally, she exhaled. And in another place, James drove with headlights slicing through night fog, his grip on the wheel white-knuckled, whispering to himself like a prayer. Please still be alive. Two souls, one step apart, held together by breath and hope. James pulled up to the roadside shack, tires crunching over gravel. His heart was pounding louder than the engine. He slammed the car door and rushed toward the dim lantern light hanging by the entrance. An old woman stepped out, wiping her hands on a faded apron. "Looking for someone?" James nodded quickly. "A girl, thin, tired, traveling alone, maybe with a limp." She squinted at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "She was here, didn't eat much, left in a hurry." James leaned forward, urgent. "How long ago?" The woman glanced at the sky. "Not long, maybe 20 minutes, but she looked scared, like someone was chasing her." He stepped back, eyes scanning the empty road. 20 minutes, he muttered. "I could have caught up, I was so close." Behind him, the engine hummed impatiently. He climbed in and drove again, faster this time, headlights slicing through the oncoming dusk. His thoughts spiraled. Where would she go? Would she take the road, hide in the trees? What if... No, don't think like that. Meanwhile, not far ahead, Diep crawled out from behind the overturned cart. Blood soaked her torn pants, but her eyes were fixed on the faint line of road light far away. She wiped her hands on her shirt, stood up shakily. She didn't know who was still following her, only that she had to keep moving. James took a sharp turn, gravel scattering. Somewhere, the forest thinned. A faint silhouette staggered forward through tall grass, but the headlights didn't find her. Not yet. Only the wind carried their names toward each other. The night had settled into stillness, save for the wind that stirred the tall grass like whispers from another world. Diep leaned against a weathered fence post, her breath fogging in the chill air. Her legs ached, her side throbbed. The cut on her knee had dried to a crust of blood and dust, but she was still standing. The road stretched ahead, silent and empty. A distant glow hinted at the next town, maybe 20 kilometers more. She could make it. She had to. Behind her, the darkness was quiet. No footsteps, no flashlight. But she didn't trust it. She glanced toward the stars. "Just one more night," she whispered, as if the sky could grant her mercy. "Let me make it through one more night." Elsewhere, James sat behind the wheel at the edge of a turnoff. He'd stopped driving. His hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. Eyes fixed on the nothingness ahead. He didn't know where she was anymore. Just that she had been here. And now she was not. He reached into the glove box, pulling out the photo, the one of Diep and the two children. It was bent at the corners, smudged. He touched her face gently, thumb grazing the printed paper. "If I see you again," he said quietly, "I won't let you go a second time." On the wind, the world didn't answer. But somewhere out there, two people walked toward the same horizon, one step at a time. Both tired, both bleeding, both still believing. After escaping, Diep was only 100 kilometers from home. She stopped at a roadside tea shack, but soon realized someone had been asking about her. A chilling realization struck. John hadn't given up. Diep fled through a field of tall grass, injured, and hid behind an overturned cart. In the dark, John searched, his flashlight passing just inches from her, only a breath away. Meanwhile, James was following scattered clues. He arrived at the place Diep had just left, realizing he was only minutes too late. They were close, but still lost from each other. Diep pressed on, while James whispered to the night, "If I see you again, I won't let go this time."
Sau khi trốn thoát, Diep chỉ còn cách nhà 100 km. Cô dừng lại ở một bên quán trà ven đường, nhưng mới nhận ra có người đã hỏi về cô. Một nhận thức lạnh lùng ập đến. John vẫn chưa bỏ cuộc. Diep chạy trốn qua khỏi cánh đồng cỏ cao bị thương, ẩn sau một chiếc xe đẩy bị lật. Trong buổi tối, John tìm kiếm, đèn pin của anh ta đã chỉ cách cô vài hơi thở. Trong đó, James đang lần theo những manh mối rải rác. Anh ta đến nơi Diep vừa rời đi, nhận ra rằng mình chỉ muộn vài phút. Họ đã ở đó gần, nhưng vẫn lạc mất nhau. Diep tiến lên. Diep tiến lên, trong khi James âm thầm với màn đêm, "Nếu tôi gặp lại em, lần này tôi sẽ không buông tay đâu."